Welcome to the Mindful Club, an intellectual space in China for personal and professional development. We ask influential leaders, CEOs, consuls, and directors about their career experiences and life lessons. Welcome. What was the question?
I think you were talking about pizza and food. We got to talk about healthy living today.
Yeah, I think. So, how is your sleep, your diet, your exercise?
It's perfect. I'm
pizza, burger.
Yeah, and actually I'm on a 90-day plan. So after Thanksgiving, Christmas, Chinese New Year, 90 days, no alcohol, sort of, pretty much. Clean food, up at 4:30 every morning. No cell phone until sort of 7, ideally, and then go from there.
Do you eat any kind of junk food, or you don't touch this?
Of course. Of course.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today we are having a coffee with Mr. David Edwards, founding head of school at ISA International School and vice president of project development at ISA International Education Group. Good morning, David.
That was a great introduction. Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks a lot for coming.
My pleasure.
So one day you are at home or in the school and you receive a call to get invited to China, or how did it happen?
Interesting question. So I'd spent, hopefully it's not a boring biography, but I had spent about 15 years in Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore. You know, family calls you home after a little while, and I did go back to Melbourne for a little while, and a really interesting role, but probably one of the easiest roles I've ever done. And as happens, I just made the decision to be open if someone reached out to have a conversation. It's always dangerous when you do that because suddenly the universe starts sending you things and conversations happen. And it wasn't just China, there was a few other opportunities. But the more I had the conversations, I then came and visited Guangzhou, met the founders of what was then a very early stage company. And you got to be careful what you wish for. And not long after, about 8 months later, here I was in Guangzhou.
Which year was that?
2019 was when I officially started the conversation, and when I also moved to China.
Right before the famous pandemic?
Absolutely. So for a little while I was commuting. So I was still finishing off some stuff in Australia and was commuting in and out of Guangzhou and Melbourne. Back when we could travel and flights were easy. And I was back in Melbourne packing up the house right during Spring Festival. And obviously then, the world exploded and I got back to China in early February.
I guess that back then, were you familiar with the international education system in China, like compared to the other places?
Yeah, I was. So even when I was based in Singapore, the company I was with, whilst I led a project there, I also headed up some regional work. And we had a project in Tianjin. So a little bit outside of Tianjin in Eco City. It was a joint venture with Singapore government and Chinese government. So I was coming in and out of Tianjin a little bit. Beijing I'd gone to quite a lot, and as I mentioned, I'd been in Hong Kong for a few years, and obviously was in and out of Shenzhen as you do at that time. So knew China okay. I wouldn't say I was an expert for sure, but I'd done some business here before.
So because you have been working in all these different places, what would you say is different about international education in China compared to other places like Singapore, Hong Kong?
Yeah, well, look, maybe I'll bundle it up. I think there's obvious comparisons between the West. So I'd done some stuff in Australia, was doing some work in Chicago, France, UK. Dubai's probably a good comparison. So I think the big markets, Dubai, Singapore, Australia, and China are probably worth a comparison. I mean, Dubai is a little bit like Wolf of Wall Street sort of stuff. I mean, it's turn and it's burn, and 80% of the market there are foreigners, and it's very robust and pretty aggressive as a market for doing business. Singapore was really different. Regulatory-wise, probably no different to anywhere else, but the ease of doing business and the confidence you can have. There's very low corruption. It's pretty transparent. They're very encouraging of foreign investment in the country, so it was pretty good. Malaysia was sort of the opposite. It was a little bit of the wild, wild west and lots of opportunity, but how you do business there didn't quite suit my values. There's a little bit of some interesting sort of potential deals. And Australia was great for lifestyle, but very remote from the rest of the world, and probably a belief that the system was the best, but within a bubble. And the speed of doing business there, I found after being abroad for a long time, really slow. And that's part of why I ended up in China. And China is, particularly the south of China, is very welcoming, it's very friendly. Hongpu district where we're sitting today, the government's very, very progressive. And that's made the business dealings here quite enjoyable. Different to Beijing, different to Tianjin, different to Shanghai, but certainly the south of China. I've quite enjoyed the transactional approach and the relationship approach for doing business.
Nice, nice. And now that we are in a private situation, nobody's listening to us, what is something about this industry that people usually don't know that surprised me?
It's interesting with education. I think a lot of people feel that they're experts for no other reason than they went to a school. I've got a pilot's license. I hop on planes a lot. I would never go and knock on the door of an airline and say to the captain and co-pilot, hey, I need to give you some tips on how to fly the plane today. I've had a little bit of surgery. I'd never sit with the surgeon and say, hey, let me give you some advice on what you need to do today. And I want my family to watch what you're doing, and then you need to give a report on it. Education, everyone thinks they're an expert, but very few people are. And what people really misunderstand is how complex education is. So where we're sitting today for this interview, this is a $170 million US investment. I have 7 different regulatory bodies I need to be certified through, in addition to health, food services, residential services, security, community offices, and everything else. So we have a complexity here that most industries don't have. We are a high value product, so people are spending a lot of money and tend to stay with you for a long time. But also, if I'm really honest, we're an industry that is absolutely going to innovate. For the first time ever, I think education is going to innovate. And the pandemic, whilst it's caused a lot of challenge, it's the catalytic moment for the world of education, simply because of the scale. 198 countries, 97% of K-12 students globally have been impacted by schools. Even January of 2021, more than 100 countries still did not have a plan for children to go back into schools. Sometimes you need scale of challenge and scale of issue to make meaningful change. And we will change how we assess. We will change teaching and learning. We will change the quality of what we provide to children. I think that's an awesome thing. And people misunderstand that and probably don't understand the challenge of the business of education. They think it's, well, I went to school and therefore it's just a classroom. It's a very complex industry.
How did the COVID situation change the whole thing? I mean, I don't mean in terms of having more tests or being more strict in terms of the entry. How did it change in terms of innovation and for the future, a couple of years?
I think there's probably 2 parts. I mean, I'll start on the soft side and I'll talk more about the future. On the soft side, there's an emotion during this. For our project, we launched right in the middle of the pandemic. We opened the school August 30th, 2020. In February of 2020, our construction company, which was a Wuhan-based construction company, so everyone went home to Wuhan for Spring Festival and pretty much didn't come back again for a long time. So for us, when we look at the industry, welfare and well-being, I mean, here we are 2022 March, we still have challenge. People are emotionally exhausted from this. People in Shenzhen are still doing online teaching. Schools in Shanghai are closed at the moment. In the US, schools are open, but 80% of the teachers aren't turning up to work. So there's a lot of well-being issues. And if we think about the impact on children, forgetting China for a moment, because we're in this fortunate bubble, we've got a whole group of kids that would normally be in kindergarten for their basic literacy and numeracy who still have not gone to school. We'll see that impact 5-10 years from now. We have, if you look at Melbourne had 300 days of hard lockdown. There are 2 groups of graduating students that actually were never at school for their last 2 years of school.
They don't even know each other.
Don't know each other, and how they matriculate out now into university, their university still hasn't been face-to-face. We're going to see that impact when we bring these people into the workforce. So all industries are going to have to think about well-being, skills development, social interaction is going to be a critical part. For the industry, I was probably a big advocate, probably 10 years ago, and I had an edtech business. I thought edtech was going to be kind of the golden ticket to innovating education. I got it completely wrong. If we've learned nothing else through all industries, but obviously education, people are crying out for face-to-face contact. Absolutely crying out for it. There is a fatigue for online. There's not a genuineness of online. And I think that's where the biggest shift has been. We thought technology would be a tool for change. Actually, it's not. It'll help, but what people are craving for is human interaction and the quality of that human interaction. And that'll be something that's really needed in education going forward.
Would you say that was one of the biggest challenges when you were on board 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had challenge, right? I mean, it's the Great Resignation, and education is no different to anywhere else. I think the challenge in pre-operations was, I'll be honest, as a CEO, it was every day it was like you're getting punched in the face, because China had closed the borders. The regulations for even how you could get people in changed every day. Then every country where we had every staff member, we had people in 30 different countries. Their passports may not have been of that country. So you add another layer of complexity. It was, how could you get these people here? They had all given up jobs. They had their own children in some cases. We didn't quite know what was happening in China. They didn't know what was going on in their country. But we'd made a promise to open the school. Parents had trusted us. Parents were crazy, right? I couldn't show them a building, couldn't meet a teacher. I had no evidence other than sitting down like today and having a coffee. So that challenge of getting people here, but also over time, dealing with everyone's emotions. You know, it's a responsibility as a leader to support your team and your community. For us, it's everything. So the kids were upset. They wanted to get to school and couldn't. The parents were stressed because their kids were at home. They wanted to send them in, they wanted to get rid of them for a while. But all of our staff were going through their own challenges. They weren't getting paid, they couldn't get to the country, flights were being cancelled, visas weren't being approved, consulates were closed, we were struggling to give answers. That's emotionally wearing, and you need to give your whole self to that, but you're also dealing with your own challenges too, and that was an exhausting time. We're still going through that time, but that's now in the DNA of the organisation, and I think the resilience and the stubbornness that we had during that period is what got us through, and it's what'll help us go really the next 2 years. I think we're going to see the impact of this linger on a little bit.
When someone's under so much pressure, you know, everyone, let's say, is complaining, situation is difficult. How do you deal with this yourself, like emotionally speaking? How do you lead the team so, you know, you give them good level of pressure so everyone's still working? How do you handle this?
You need to know that none of this is personal.
Yeah.
People need a place to vent. And when and again, particularly in the startup, everyone knows one person. In a startup, they actually don't know everyone else. They do after you open, but in the startup, actually they only know, in my case, they knew me. So you certainly need not to take it personal. You need to be available for it to vent. But I'll be honest, it's pretty wearing, you know, and you're getting it from everyone. You're getting it from investors and government and kids and parents and staff and everything else. I think you need to be pretty strong as a person. I think you need to have outlets. And I don't know if I was very good in that, if I'm honest, during the pre-operations phase. You know, 18 months without a day off, not a holiday, just no day off. It was 7 days a week for 18 months. Dealing with stress, sleep, exercise, knowing your own cues when you're starting to feel the burnout is really important. I don't know if I did that well. I'm still here. I still survived, I guess, and I'm still ticking over. But I was really cognizant of that. But if I'm also honest, stuff just had to get done. So you have two options. You either give up, or you say, you know what, for a period of time, I'm just going to have to do this. And it meant, I mean, it's not a good example. I think it's probably bad leadership. But there were a series of times over a 7-week period that I remember really well, where there was at least 2 times a week I didn't go to sleep. So we worked during the day, but then stuff had to get done through the night, partly compliance, partly other things, and it was a decision I made personally. I probably wasn't at my best afterwards, but it did get some stuff done that probably we wouldn't have got done otherwise. And I was lucky I had some other people that were chunking out time as well. And you just have to know that it's going to improve. You don't know when it's going to improve. You have to manage, I'll be honest, you have to manage your sense of hope. There's a very good book I read from a guy who ended up being a US senator, and he was a POW during the Vietnam War, and he was in a Vietnamese prison for 3 years. And he was saying in his book that what made him survive and others didn't was he stopped the sense of hope. He had belief that things would improve, but he stopped having hope that tomorrow or a defined period. He got rid of timelines, and that allowed him to survive a little bit better than others didn't. And it was an approach I took as well. I didn't have a deadline for when I could go and see my family, or when I could do other things. I just had to have belief it would get better and focus on what I needed now. That for me is what partly got me through.
And as a leader, when you have to make all these decisions, what factors determine how you make these decisions? Do you follow some quote, some role model, some book, or how do you make these decisions?
I'll give you a quote, and I'll give you maybe a little bit more practical. I'm a child of the 70s, and in the 70s, one of the most important films ever made in human history, which was Star Wars Episode 4, was launched by George Lucas. I remember seeing it with my dad, and there's a character in Star Wars called Yoda, and Yoda has a very cool line, and I think it's a great line, and I still use it now. And Yoda in the second film, which is Episode 5, says to Luke Skywalker, "Do or do not, there is no try." And I think that's a really good quote. You either get stuff done,
yes,
or you don't. And in a startup business, getting stuff done is what matters. I can dream upon a star about the interior design, but at the end of the day, you need to have carpet and walls and clothes. You have to have stuff done. So when it comes to decision making, in the early days of a startup, when very few people are in country and had their own things to deal with, the volume of decisions one person makes is a lot. For me, I looked at two things. Yes, I needed to make a lot of stuff, but I needed to train up people and empower people to make a lot of other decisions. And really, you need to transition to my sort of role of high value decisions and support those learning how to make decisions, and then ultimately get out of the way and let other people make decisions on the ground much, much quicker than I can do. And that took a little while to do that. But that helped enormously as well, and they're much smarter than I am anyway.
You also managed around all these years 800 million USD in startups. Yeah. Were they always in education or in other investments as well?
Yeah, look, it's actually over $1 billion now in education, and it sounds a sexy number and it's really interesting to throw it out there as a blur. It's actually more than that. But in the pure startup space now, it's a bit over $1 billion USD of startup schools. Yeah. I've done other stuff as well, but the education is really the high value stuff in terms of big numbers.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see this industry going in the next couple of years? I know we already talked about this, but under the new conditions compared to outside China, what do you think is going to happen?
Education will change completely. K-12 education will absolutely change. The private education space will be the first to change because they don't have the bureaucracy of government systems. I think beyond the private, the third group that will change will be countries like China and Singapore, where you have strong centralized government that don't get bogged down on popular decision. I think the last to change will be what people think are the big two, which is the US and UK. And everyone needs to remember, they haven't been in the top 20 rankings of PISA scores for a long time. So I still don't quite know everyone gets hot and sweaty about the US and UK for K-12 schools, because they're not the best. They haven't been for probably 15 years. And they will be the last because they have this cycle of government decision making and elections where people make what they think is popular, not what's right. I think, if you look at what China government's done, I think it's a pretty bold decision. They've come out and said the well-being of our children is the number one priority. That's a huge statement. Completely shook up a multi-billion-dollar industry. But what China does that the West doesn't do is they look at 100-year decisions. West is looking at, what do I need to do this afternoon to be popular? They're not looking at even 5 years, let alone 100 years. So I think that's the big catalytic change. How we assess children, how we quantify learning data and growth will change, and what the qualities of teaching and learning will change. And the reason why this is going to happen as well is we already can see industry has changed. Companies like KPMG now don't look at what university you go to, and they don't look at your university scores. They throw a bunch of people into a room for 2 or 3 days and give them real world tests, and they watch collaboration, communication, and engagement. Then they look at the other stuff afterwards. Absolutely, I think that's the most important thing. So COVID's helping that.
Yeah.
I think there's some governments like China, like Singapore, that are making some big decisions already and will push change. And as I say, private schools don't have the bureaucratic element around it, and we can drive things much, much sooner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those listening to us, education industry is huge in China. I have a lot of friends who also run schools as well. Imagine someone in the 30s or 40s who would like to succeed in this industry. Which kind of skills do you think they should know, or knowledge? Soft skills, hard skills?
Even beyond education, you need to have a purpose.
Yes.
If you're doing something because of a job, I think you've already started in a bad spot. Because at the end of the day, all of us are working long hours, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know people carry on about Jack Ma with 996. I would argue it's probably 997, but it's you need to have a purpose if you're going to commit. For education in particular, we are in an emotional industry. Parents are trusting us.
Yeah.
This is the most important person in their, or people in their life, and they're handing over. So if you don't have that sense of purpose, you're going to struggle. I think in your 30s as well, you kind of started to learn a little bit. You're stepping either into middle management or maybe accelerating beyond middle management. So asking questions and saying yes, and don't being obsessed about a role. Just, it's that crazy Jim Carrey movie called Yes Man. It's a good comedy, but it's a great comedy. He goes through and says yes, and it's extraordinary if you try that yourself of just say yes to things and see what happens. That's what I moved overseas when I was 30. With no plan, no intention. I took a backward step, but it's like snakes and ladders. Sometimes you move across to move up, and I feel really blessed and fortunate. The things I've experienced, the people I've met, the opportunities I've had, the world I now get to see, I wouldn't have got if I stayed in one place. And I think someone in their 30s, where maybe your responsibilities are still not so big, what's the worst that can happen, honestly? As long as you're not harming someone and harming yourself, the world's an exciting place, and will always remain an exciting place, and we should step out into it.
What's your opinion on taking risk? From your experience, or would you recommend someone, what is the sweet spot, like what is a good level of risk taking?
Well, you need your own toolkit.
Yeah.
What I see as risk and what you see as risk is really different. Yeah. I've got a great friend. We met each other in grade 1, so we've known each other a long time. His name's Andrew. He's a really different guy to I. We grew up in the same town, went through the same schools. We're still very, very good friends. He's a guy that has worked fundamentally in the same company, the same industry for 30 years. He loves that. He's on the Old Boys Association at my school. He's still about 10 minutes away from my school. That brings him comfort and energy and excitement. That's right for him. Mm-hmm. He freaks out when he looks at what I'm doing. It spins his head. When I look at what he's doing, it spins my head. I would be the worst person to do that. So you need to have your own toolkit for risk. And for me, I look at calculated risk. I look at what the opportunities. I always look at the people. I never look at the title. Compensation is really the last sort of thing to look at. But is there something you can add value, and will it help? I look at it, will it help my growth? Will I see a part of the world and meet people maybe I didn't before? Mm-hmm. And is that exciting? Yeah. And does it scare me? If it doesn't scare me, I never go to it. If it scares me, then yeah, why not?